Welcome to Mox Zirconia. I'm Colin, and today we're going to brew up an awesome red-blue Cartouche Prowess deck for the new standard. Thank you very much for joining me today. On our podcast 2 weeks ago, we brewed up a deck trying to see if we could make the Cartouches and Trials, which are the new enchantment cards in Amonkhet, powerful enough for Standard. They are definitely powerful enough in Draft, but we wanted to see if we could find some scenario or some way that we could make them, get them up over the edge to be really powerful in Standard, and I believe we found that deck. We focused on the red and blue Trials and Cartouches because they are cheaper and because they also fit into colors that can utilize creatures with Prowess. Since they are enchantment spells, they count as non-creature spells and can pump your Prowess creatures. So, a card like Cartouche of Knowledge, which gives your creature +1/+1 and flying, and returns all Trials to your hand, is just really good for Prowess because it essentially makes it +2/+2. So, we wanted to focus on those ones. So the Trials themselves we felt were things that we wanted to do. You know, with Knowledge, we want to draw cards, and in a deck where we're trying to get our creatures through, we're going to want to be removing blockers. So the Trial of Zeal also helps us remove blockers very effectively. And then, every time we play a Cartouche, it triggers Prowess for however many creatures we have on the battlefield, and it returns all those Trials to our hand. So that's really great because one of the limitations to playing auras, like enchantment auras like the Cartouches, is that essentially if your creature gets removed, someone uses direct removal on your creature, you're down 2 cards because your creature dies and then the aura that was attached to it goes to the graveyard. However, if you have a Trial on the battlefield and you play a Cartouche, you return the Trial to your hand. If your creature gets removed, you're not down a card. You got the Trial back. So we thought that was pretty powerful. And with the price is right with the Cartouche of Zeal and the Cartouche of Knowledge. So anyway, that said, let's get into the other cards of the deck. Let's start with the Prowess creatures that we're going to use. This deck is really, really lean. We're trying to keep everything really cheap so that we can cast as many spells per turn as we can to keep our Prowess chain going. So, the obvious choice, we're going to start with 4 Stormchaser Mage, because flying and haste is just wonderful. Soul-Scar Mage actually takes some of the good burn cards that we have in the deck and the Trial of Zeal and makes the damage permanent on creatures, which is really great. And then we're running 5 generic Prowess creatures. So we chose 3 Sanguinary Mage and 2 Nimble-Blade Khenra, but those are actually functionally the same card because this deck doesn't really care about Warrior or Vampire Tribal, so you can use whichever mix you have and you want, but we just wanted 5 of them. You'll notice that all these creatures are very small and they are very cheap. We want to keep this really, really low to the ground. We want to get them out on turn 1 and 2 so that we can start looping our Trials as soon as possible. So, because this is a Prowess deck, even though we're in blue, we're going to really try to resist the temptation to play a lot of counterspells, or any counterspells, because we don't want to hold mana up, we want to use all of our mana efficiently, and we want to play as many spells as we can on our own turn. That way, our creatures get bigger and bigger, and we can get more damage through. So, this is where the Trials come in. So we want to get the Trials down first so that we can then play the Cartouches and bounce them back to our hands. So we're running 4 Trial of Zeal, which just does 3 damage to a creature, and 4 Trial of Knowledge to give ourselves that extra card draw if we need to, and then discard that 5th land if we don't need it. So we definitely feel like these cards are the ones where we're like, wouldn't maybe a more efficient burn spell like Fiery Temper or something be a little bit better? Not really, as long as we can return them to our hand at least once throughout a game with a Cartouche, then the value of these cards is actually pretty good, and in the example of Trial of Zeal, 3 mana for 3 damage is actually still a pretty good rate. So, those Cartouches that we're playing are Cartouche of Zeal, which we're playing 3 of, and Cartouche of Knowledge. Now, like I said earlier, these are almost double whammies when you play them on this turn, and then that +1/+1 sticks around if you get to attack with the creature the next turn if it's not removed. And then, the fact that Cartouche of Knowledge grants flying to your creature really makes a lot of the more generic prowess creatures that we have on the list act a lot more like a Stormchaser Mage and get over the top, which, as it turns out, is really one of the keys to this deck's success, is how much evasion you can give your creatures. So when you've played all your spells and the prowess count is high and your creatures are as big as they could be, you can make sure and connect with all of that damage. So let's take a look at some of the spells that we're going to be casting to help our creatures get through. So we're going to play 4 Slip Through Space. This just makes a creature unblockable and pumps it +1/+1, and you get a card back, which is really great. So you can, if you're running low on cards, you can then drop the next spell and be good to go. Galvanic Bombardment is also another cheap spell. This one is sort of like a strictly better shock in this deck, because theoretically when you play the second one it does 4 damage, and we're not really sure we're going to get to like 3 and 4 of them, but we figure that the extra couple damage later in the game can really add up and get some bigger creatures if your opponent is playing 4 and 5 drops or a more mid-range strategy, because we're trying to go really underneath them. And then we're rounding out that package with 1 Expedite to also give you a card back, and give yourself haste if you feel like you can get over the top by playing one of your cheap creatures, and then the Expedite to make an attack that turn and take advantage of the situation. So basically triggering prowess on the cheap, getting the cards back, and hopefully getting creatures out of the way or making them unblockable is how we're going to get damage under our opponents, who are more than likely going to be playing bigger decks. So those are the value cards that we're going to run, and then we've got a little bit of extra spice for finishing, and we're going to run 1 Savage Alliance, 1 Open into Wonder, and 1 Insult to Injury. And these are kind of your extra finishing spells. Savage Alliance can give your whole team trample to get some damage through if you can't make them unblockable, and it also has some additional creature burn as an option if you need it. Insult doubles the damage of all your creatures and trials, so if you can play a trial, play a cartouche, play a trial again, that's 12 damage just from your trials, and then you're attacking with all of your prowess triggers. It adds up really quick if you can get that one down. That's usually if the game is running a little bit longer and you have a little bit of extra mana. That can happen. And then Open into Wonder is just extra evasion for your creatures and card draw back. We didn't really find that we were drawing more than 2 or 3 cards off of this card, but the fact that it grants the evasion so that they can get through really helps make the card really important. And this is also really important because this deck is not designed to block. You're going to want to be attacking all the time, and you're going to be wanting to use your mana as efficiently as possible and just get through and get them dead as quickly as you can, because in Standard right now there are a lot of really fast decks. You want to make sure that you're getting them to a really low life total before they can get their Glory Bringers out, or before they can get their Heart of Kiran and Gideon Ally of Zendikar combos online. So that's it for the spells. Let's talk about lands really quick. We're going really simple. 2 Wandering Fumaroles can give you an extra sneaky win condition if you need it. 4 Spirebluff Canals are important because you really want one in your opening hand to get both of those colors early, especially with Stormchaser Mage that you really want to come down on turn 2. It's important to have both of your colors as quickly as possible. And then we're just running 9 mountains and 7 islands to round out to a 22 land mana base. So this deck has a super low average CMC of 1.84, and we're drawing a lot of spells off of cantrips, so that allows us to go down to 22 lands and still get a pretty consistent draw. So that's the 60. Now let's talk about some options that you could have in your sideboard. And don't forget, sideboarding is really most effective when it's tailored to your local metagame. So the cards that we chose to put in the sideboard aren't necessarily the cards you're going to want to choose. Definitely take a look at what sort of strategies you're seeing people at F&M at your local store or at your game days, and pick cards that are going to combat that better. But make sure you're staying cheap and low. So these are the cards that we've chosen for the sideboard and that we used in testing that we found to be very effective. If you're facing a deck with a ton of grindy recursion, throw in Magma Spray, Sweltering Suns, and Bedlam Reveler. This will help you later on because sometimes your little creatures are just going to get removed against decks. There's a lot of removal, particularly in red and black right now in Standard. And so the Bedlam Reveler is a big later game threat that still has prowess that can bring back your other cards. Now, if you're going to put in the Bedlam Revelers, don't forget that a lot of your deck is enchantment spells and not instant and sorceries, which is what makes Bedlam Reveler cheaper. So you're going to want to add 2 more lands to the deck just to make sure that you can always cast it. So we've put a couple of extra Wandering Fumaroles into the sideboard just for that reason. If you find yourself up against the vehicle decks, you should definitely try out By Force and Ceremonious Rejection and Incendiary Flow. Incendiary Flow takes care of a lot of the creatures and exiles them so that they can't come back or they can't feed a Scrappy Scrounger and bring it back. By Force is an X spell, so you're going to want to make sure that you cast it at the right time, because really this deck doesn't want to cast too many X spells, but it can really just take out their entire line of artifacts and turn everything off really quickly. And then, of course, Ceremonious Rejection can just simply counter the Heart of Kirin or counter the Scrappy Scrounger or anything you need if you need to make sure that you're getting things through. And Ceremonious Rejection is also useful against the Aetherworks Marvel deck, which is another common strategy in Standard right now and was very popular at the Pro Tour. Another card that is really interesting to board in is Saheeli Rai, because in a grindier or a control-based matchup, maybe they have a lot of creature removal but not planeswalker removal, you can play Saheeli. She does trigger Prowess because she is a non-creature spell, and when she lands, she can immediately copy one of your creatures, so then if you play a few more Prowess spells, you can pump them up and they get haste. So there's definitely some interesting interactions with Saheeli. We discovered that the deck really wants to be faster than Saheeli in the outset when you don't know your matchup, and then if you're in a slower matchup or you're finding longer games or you're having trouble keeping your creatures on the board, Saheeli is a great option to bring in for that. So definitely tailor the sideboard to your needs, but don't forget, go easy on the counter spells. You really don't want to be playing spells on your opponent's turn if at all possible. You want to save all those spells for your Prowess triggers so that you can get maximum value off of them. Anyway, that is our deck. We would love to know what you thought of it. We brewed the deck live on our podcast. We have a weekly podcast called Mox Team Zirconia that you can find on Stitcher, Android, iTunes, anywhere you'd like to get your podcasts. Come check us out, because on this episode we talked all about the cards when we were choosing them and our conversation about how we made the choices and what got cut and what didn't. And a lot of that is really important if you want to learn a deck, is kind of knowing sort of like where the decisions for the cards came from, and we talked all that through. And then we also gave the results of testing it through a round of testing through our standard gauntlet based on the Pro Tour top 8 decks and how the deck did against those. So definitely check that out in the next episode, and I put the links to both of those podcast episodes into the description below, so please check it out and then let us know what you think. Also, we would appreciate it if you please subscribe to the YouTube channel. We are just ramping up. We're going to get a lot more content in here, and we're really glad you're with us, and we want to make sure that you don't miss anything from us. So please, go into that bottom corner, hit that subscribe button. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.